Hey everybody, welcome to Wire Talk. So today we have a very special guest on our podcast, and her name is Dr. Kristen Hodges. And I met her back in the spring in Florida, and I had been wanting to get an expert on the show on autism, and then she came up to me, introduced herself, and because she had heard me say that I wanted to do that, and she said, not only am I a doctorate in psychology, but I also have a son with autism. So I'm super excited that she's going to be on the show today, because not only is she an expert in her field, she also is living it. And guys, that's what it's all about, is getting help from someone and then implementing those tools into your life to make your life easier and more beneficial. So I'm so excited to get going on this today. So welcome to Wire Talk.
Well, hello, mamas, and welcome to Wire Talk. Today, we have a very special guest joining us. Dr. Kristen Hodges is joining us to talk about autism. And Mom, what do you know about autism before we go into this interview?
You know, I don't know that much, to be honest. I've just had friends throughout, my life, and definitely having children and all that, and just seeing what they go through. But it's just really from the outside looking in. I've never had it in my personal life. Just being a friend and walking alongside another person is really my closest contact that I've ever been around it. So I'm super excited about this, because I know the numbers are on the rise, and I really think moms out there need some great info, and our guest today is going to be fabulous.
I'm very excited.
I am too.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Dr. Hodges has to say, so let's call her up.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
So welcome, Kristen.
Hello,
How
Kristen.
are you?
Welcome to Wire Talk.
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yes. Well, before we get started on all of your knowledge and everything, fill us in a little bit about you. I told the moms before we even got going that I met you in Florida at an event that I did down there. And you were just like a breath of fresh air whenever we started talking. And I thought, I want to have her on the show. So, and then of course, I think I lost your phone number. So it took me forever to find it. So it's a little later than what I originally wanted, but here we are. Tell us a little bit about you and your life, your children, your marriage, all the fun stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and encourage other mamas. I have a 6-year-old with autism. And so I've been in this journey now for 3 years. And I know this is just a community that really needs encouragement. So it's been interesting, the journey that God has taken me on, because I started off in the world of psychology, not knowing that day to day I would be using it in my own home. And so if I can just take you on my educational journey kind of quickly. So I have a master's degree in clinical psychology and a PhD in IO psychology. When I was still in my bachelor's program, my psychology degree focused on child development. And so then from there, I interned and then worked with special education kids.
Okay.
Then when I was in my master's degree in clinical psychology, I worked with kids who were on the spectrum. So that was actually my first chance in working one-on-one with them, doing play therapy and some of those things. And so when I finished my master's degree, that's still what I did for a while. So then from my master's degree, I went on and worked with women whose children had been taken away from them by the state. And so working with them and then their kids when they were returned, but I did parenting classes for them and how that they could just do better, and working with often were very difficult, challenging children in different ways.
Sure.
And then for the last 10 years, I've been teaching at the university level classes such as lifespan developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, clinical psychology, all of those classes. So I've had all this knowledge. And then when it was day to day in my own home and looking at it, sometimes the textbooks went out the window.
Yes, of course.
And so really, I've learned more in the last 3 years than any of my clinical experience, I think, could have taught me. But I'm really grateful that God resourced me with that information so that I knew what I was looking for and had a starting point. And I will genuinely say that when I first started and I felt like this full-time case manager for my son, it felt so overwhelming, and it can
Mm-hmm.
feel like, where is even the next step? And even at the time I thought, gosh, I have all this education and all this experience and I feel overwhelmed. I can't
Right.
imagine how moms who aren't in the world of psychology and haven't worked with kids that have these needs and haven't worked in these systems, where they would even start.
Right.
And that's honestly where a big part of me just to pour back into these women has come from, because I know what a challenge it can be.
You know what? I know the moms out there right now that are listening are just breathing a sigh of relief because they're thinking, if she was overwhelmed, and look at all the knowledge and experience and wisdom that she'd gained throughout the years, if she was overwhelmed, then of course I'm going to be overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
So, wow. Thank you. Right there. That is so important. I just love that. I love that. So thank you for your transparency on that too.
It's awesome.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm just impressed about how much you've done. I'm like, whoa, that's a lot.
I know. That's awesome.
Like in so many different fields too. That's really impressive.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we definitely have an expert on the show today.
Yes.
So welcome, Dr. Hodges.
Well, we are so excited that you're joining us today. And according to statistics, autism rates have increased every year in the United States since the CDC began tracking it in 2000. Just so crazy. It's on the minds of moms in our audience where they have an autistic child themselves or is a child with autism in their neighborhood or class in school. This is an episode we've been planning for a really long time, and we wanted an expert voice to join us and discuss on it. So thank you so much again for joining us today.
So Kristen, that's amazing, all of your experience and all that. Tell us about your family. So you said your son is 6. You have 3 children, so give us their ages and how long have you been married, and also just how did having an autism child, like once you realized, because I think you said you didn't realize it for 3 years, and that's usually the way it is, right?
Right.
Just how that's affected the whole family even.
That's a great question. So my husband and I have been married for almost 15 years. We actually met when we were teenagers, but didn't marry until years later.
Okay.
And then I have a stepdaughter who is 21 years old. And then we have a almost 13-year-old. Their birthdays are actually tomorrow and the next day.
Oh, wow.
So this week they'll be 13. And then my youngest will be turning 7. He's 6 right now. And so oldest is stepdaughter, then 2 boys. And when my older son came along, so this was the first for me to have outside of my stepdaughter, he was literally the easiest child ever to raise. Like one of those, if you looked sideways, you'd be like, I'm so sorry. What happened? What did I do? Right. He was my sidekick. He was snuggly. He literally was just so connected with me and so easy. And I thought, this parenting thing is so easy.
What is everybody complaining about?
Yeah. Like, I don't even see what the problem is here. And then I had my youngest. And I'm really grateful that the Lord gave me my older one first, because I think I would have genuinely thought I was a terrible parent if I had my youngest one first. Not that he's not wonderful and loving and all these things, but he's so challenging and independent anyway in his personality. And then when he started having big difficulties, big explosions, it was like all of my parenting tools just went right outside the window. I had no idea what I was doing. And so I can give you some examples. So it was actually during the summer of 2020, which as soon as I say that, everybody pictures lockdown, right? We're all home, we're all kind of isolated. Even here in Florida, I promise we did some isolating.
Some.
And so I had spent the summer with this child who literally would scream, "I hate you" to me every day.
Aww.
And so I remember my husband was still going to the office and he called me one day and I was just sobbing and he was like, "What is wrong?" And I was like, "Cruz told me he hated me." And he goes, "But he says that every day." And I was like, "But it hurt today." And so some days it was just harder than others. And so, of course, while I have this child who, if I'm trying to parent, or our parenting style is that we punish, right? If you do something wrong, you get punished. So if you spit on mommy, you get punished. But everything I would punish would just escalate the situation. So it would just get worse. If I punished for spitting, then he was kicking. If I punished for the kicking, he was throwing things. And so it was like, anything I would do, he would level up with me. And so that was where I just felt this loss. And then here's my stepdaughter was she's older. So sometimes she was home, sometimes she was gone being her adult self. But here I have this other child who's so tenderhearted, who would just be sitting in the corner with his hands over his ears. So it's like, how do you balance this this one child who obviously his brain's on fire. No child wants to behave like that. That's the first thing. Not looking at kids as they're naughty, but something's wrong. Nobody wants to feel that way. And then balancing it with this other child to make sure that he's not traumatized on the way.
Right.
And so how do you do this tug of war? And I don't know that I always got it right. I'm a mom. I'm a person. Doesn't matter how many letters and credentials are behind my name. But the biggest thing is looking and going, okay, how do I create one-on-one time, first of all, for my husband and I? So wherever you're at in with your kids, if you and your husband are not somehow connected, somehow leaning on each other, somehow making space for each other, parents with kids with any disability are at least twice as likely to get a divorce as parents who do not have a child with a disability. It's because it's really hard. And so first making time for each other, but then also creating space for the kids who don't have the concerns that you're seeing. So my older son and I, we go on coffee dates and we do one-on-one things so that I can totally be focused on him. In terms of my younger, and then we'll dive into how did we help him get some help, and maybe what does parenting with a kid with autism look like?
That's great.
What are some of the signs and symptoms of autism, and how is autism different from other developmental disorders?
That's a great question. So with autism, there are a few main areas that they really struggle with. The first is that you're going to see in these social relationships. So individuals with autism have a hard time picking up on nonverbal cues. So if you're turning and you're kind of headed out the door, they may not even pick up on that. Typically, kids with autism have a hard time making eye contact. That's not a requirement, but it is just something that you'll notice. It's because it's overstimulating to make eye contact with you. So if I was an individual with autism, if I'm looking over here, I can actually focus better on what you're saying and responding than if I'm looking directly at you.
Like I knew that they didn't look at your eye contact, but I never knew the reason why behind that.
Yes.
I think this is so good for the moms to hear because it gives moms that are not in the autistic world more empathy and understanding of that's why that child is behaving this way. That makes so much sense,
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love how you said their brain is on fire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're so overstimulated.
Yeah. So good.
So children with autism, they have a really hard time with knowing kind of the back and forth of conversations. So if you ask them something that's really interesting to them, so let's say it's a kiddo that's really focused on trains, which is another symptom, they tend to have a hyper focus on one area.
Yeah.
So if it's a kid who loves trains and you ask them about trains, they will tell you about them for 35 minutes and not even think about the fact that this should be a back and forth conversation.
Right.
And not pick up on the fact that you're trying to leave the conversation. And this hyperfixation is also one of the, I think, giftings of kids. So there are geniuses now out there that say, because of my hyper focus on whatever area, I was able to do this. So we have these symptoms. They also can be really, really focused on whatever they're doing and struggle with transitions, especially if it's something they enjoy to something they're not going to enjoy. So that's typically where you'll see a lot of meltdown points. So if I'm playing my video game and you tell me it's time to go to grandma's and I don't want to go to grandma's, I want to play my video game, that is a prime opportunity for it, like an explosion.
Yeah.
So with those kids, they need even more, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, then we're going to go, those kind of opportunities to know what's coming, because switching them from one thing to another very quickly, their brain, we call it rock brain, but their brain is stuck on this one thing. And I don't want to shift to this thing over here. And if you make my brain is on fire and I am going to completely have a meltdown now. It's not because I want to, it's not because I want to be naughty. It's because I'm so focused on this and I can't believe that you're torturing me into making me go do that.
Wow. So good. So the moms out there that are sort of thinking, is my child on the spectrum? What would be the best course of action for her and the professional doctors to go to get the diagnosis in the right way?
Yes. Anytime that you have any questions about behaviors that might be a bit different or thought patterns that are different, the first place to start is your pediatrician. That's a great place to say, hey, I have these concerns. What's going on? Now, typically, or hopefully, your pediatrician will give you some assessments to start taking and have a great conversation with you. If your pediatrician is a little more dismissive, doesn't seem to take the time, there are still things that you can do. For instance, you can go to your county. If your child is between the ages of 3 and 5, you can get an educational diagnosis.
Okay.
What that will do is start the process so that you can get speech therapy and occupational therapy and some of these therapies going for a kid before they even start kindergarten. Now, the reason that that's wonderful is we know that social and peer interactions in kindergarten, first grade, second grade are so important to the kid actually being able to be successful in school, right? Them wanting to go to school and them having fun in school. And so getting those interventions early can actually help with the academic success of the child as well. If the kiddo is past kindergarten, still go to your county, but instead you're going to go to a guidance counselor and say, I'm having these concerns. Can you do some testing? Now, the important part is that for all of these ages, it is completely free. Your county will provide all of the testing, and then you will have a time to meet and say, here's what we found. Typically, what's offered is a psychologist, especially if they're having like social skills issues and those kind of things, occupational therapy to help with daily functioning. Occupational therapy is really cool, and it's one of my favorite things because they help with anything from cutting to social skills to emotional regulation to there's just this wide variety they can do. And then speech therapy is also offered. And so you can go right to your county and get all those services for free. Another opportunity is that you can go to a psychologist directly, depending on your insurance. And you can say, I think my kiddo has this, this, and this going on. Can you please do your testing? And so there, typically a psychologist will do an ADOS testing. It's where you literally lay out toys and see what they'll play with and kind of what they interact with. And for older kids, looking at, can they set up a living room and can they do with these characters and can they do a social situation where, they're kind of play therapy or imaginative play. And so that kind of helps because, as we said, kids with autism really have that hard time with back and forth communication. And in social skills, they don't really know who does what. And so for them to sit and do animated play or imaginative play is usually lacking. Usually they want to play side by side with somebody rolling cars or jumping on a trampoline, but not interactive. And so that psychologist can do these testings. Now there's no blood work or DNA testing or anything like that to diagnose autism. So what they'll do is based on their observations and their testing, typically ADOS, intelligence test, and can be some others for rule out, like ruling out anxiety or ruling out ADD and those kind of things. And then they'll send home assessments for the parents and for the teachers and to see kind of what people are seeing in different social situations. And then they gather all that testing together and give a diagnosis.
That's really good.
That is really good. My question was, is there any treatments or interventions for kids with autism? And do you think, or how are they effective?
So we know that the brain has really high what's called plasticity early on in life, meaning how your brain thinks and functions. Let's say a child with autism really is struggling with emotional regulation. In doing therapy, the earlier you do it, we know that you can have, it's called neurogenesis, where it's brain growth or brain development. You can actually grow brain cells in certain areas if we target early intervention. So this early intervention is a phenomenal need for these kids. And I know so many get scared of a potential diagnosis or they want to ignore it. The reality is the sooner that we grab a diagnosis and the sooner that we jump in kind of full force and get these treatments, the more that we can help with the brain kind of in developing these skills and these abilities to help our kids be successful. So yes, there's phenomenal therapies. Like I said, occupational therapy is one of my all-time favorites. I've seen what it can do for so many kids. And had I known about occupational therapy early on, I probably would be an occupational therapist today. So fascinated by what they do, but they can help with impulsivity. They can help with irritability. They can help with social skills. They can help with those daily tasks of tying your shoe and cutting paper, which often kids with autism have really hard times with those fine motor skills. They target it all. I also love speech therapy. Speech therapy can help in picking up with the nonverbals. So kind of what is their face telling you and what is their body language telling you and those things. It can help with the verbal. So even just kids who aren't speaking. So it's common in autism for children to be nonverbal, right? So they're not speaking. They still have a lot of thoughts and a lot going on, but they can work in terms of developing a picture system so the kid can point at what they want. This really helps with the frustration. Imagine not being able to verbalize to your parents what you want. But speech therapy can also help with what I call food therapy. I called it food school. I don't know if that's the right thing. But with food school, essentially what happens is kids with autism can be really picky eaters. And I know moms will say, oh, my kid's a picky eater too. No, when your kid will only eat 3 things that's a picky eater,
Right.
right? And so what happens is in autism, kids, when they see foods, especially new foods or foods that look a little different, their brain lights up the same way that if you were afraid of heights and I put you on top of a mountain.
Mm.
So it's that same fight or flight system. We're sitting down at the dinner table and something's new.
Mm.
I'm not doing that, right? If I was afraid of heights and put me on a mountain and said, oh, it's okay, be calm, I'm not going to be calm. Well, that child can't be calm either. And so what speech therapists can do through, again, I think I named it food school. I don't think that's a technical name, but what they can do is they literally play with food with the kid for once a week for a year or something like that. And what it does is it reduces that fight or flight kind of emotional response of this is scary, so that the kid can eat and sit at a dining room table. So when we first started food school, my son wouldn't sit. Like if it was food that he couldn't see it or didn't like it, forget it. Our first goal was just that he would leave food on his plate that he didn't like. And by the end of it now, so we're a year or two in, he literally will pick food up and go, I don't think I'm going to like this, but I'll try it. And so that's essentially the goal, because again, food is such an important part of our culture. Think business meetings and celebrations and funerals and all these things that is just a social part of our culture that kids need to be able to handle. And so what happens then is because they play with it and they dip it and make silly and cut it into pieces and everything else, the brain stops being quite as upset when it sees different and new foods. That one, the most controversial of the therapies is ABA therapy. ABA therapy got a really bad name 15, 20 years ago because the functional part of it was that they were trying to get kids to look more like kids who didn't have autism. So don't flap your hands, make eye contact, these kind of things. That really has gone to the wayside. That's not what it is anymore, or at least it shouldn't be anymore. ABA therapy is only supposed to focus on things to help the kid be more functional and be more successful in our kind of non-neurodiverse communities, right? So instead of being overstimulated and completely exploding and throwing things, I recognize when I'm overstimulated, I can go take a break. Or I recognize I'm getting overstimulated, I can take a deep breath. It should be those kind of things. So if you're looking at ABA therapy and you're nervous about it because you've heard some really bad feedback, you meet with an ABA therapist and you can ask them, listen, I don't want you to work on stimming. That's the repetitive behavior that kids with autism will do to calm themselves down. His stimming is fine. You don't need to work on it. Hopefully they'll say, not a problem, right? If they say, try to convince you that there's a reason they should not keep your son from flapping his hands or whatever stimming is doing, then that's not the right ABA therapist. In fact, there's a lot of ABA therapists now who actually have autism themselves. And so we're seeing this kind of change in people. Our people with autism are growing up and now wanting to invest back into kids with autism. And it's really sweet.
Well, I want to sort of touch base whenever you said at the beginning of that parents are afraid to get the diagnosis early because, and I do think I see that a lot in the Birds on a Wire moms, and they'll say, I'm fearful. I don't want to go get them tested because I don't, they don't want their child to not be able to interact socially with people. They want them to live a productive life and all this. But I love what you said about the earlier you get treatment and start the therapy, the better their brain can start learning and create new cells and all that. So just talk to us a little bit about those fears. What would you tell these moms?
So I think it's really normal anytime you say a diagnosis with our kids, right? We don't want diagnosis. We want our kids to be exactly the same health-wise as everybody else's kids. So first of all, that's a really normal fear.
Right.
If you're having that fear, if you're concerned, talk to somebody that you trust, because there is validation in that fear. And I hear you. When parents have kids diagnosed, often there's tears and part relief, part fear, and that's okay. What we can't do is stick our head into the dirt like an ostrich, right? We can't just pretend it's not there. The diagnosis doesn't change your son or daughter. All it does is open the door for services for help. And so whatever behaviors you're seeing, that's not going to change, or that's not going to get any help until we help our kids. And so just like if our kids had cancer, well, we're not going to go, well, I don't want the diagnosis of cancer. Well, if we don't get the diagnosis, we can't get the treatment, right? And so it's the same idea. And one of the things that I think might be helpful is to look up some of these people who have been diagnosed with autism, who have come out and talked about it, right? So we have a Nobel Peace Prize winner who has talked about having autism. He's also a professor. We have scientists, we have artists, we have famous actors and actresses, we have entrepreneurs, we have all these people who have said, I was diagnosed with autism.
Right.
And yet they went on to be incredibly skilled in their own area. And so what I would say is, first of all, this doesn't change your kid. Your kid still has the purpose and plan that God gave him. All it does is it creates a unique set of area where there needs to just be a little more help. Kids with autism don't learn the same way as kids without autism.
Right.
So kids without autism will learn that we behave this way at church and we behave this way at home. Well, kids with autism might not pick up on those cues. And so they need to be directly taught those things.
Yeah.
But unless you're getting the diagnosis, we don't get that help to be able to pour back into them. So for moms afraid, I would say it's okay. There's a lot of knowledge in this world. There's colleges that are adapting. There's businesses that are adapting, knowing that we have more of these kind of sensory needs going on, and we're going to have to work on this. And what I would say is just get that early intervention, because the difference that you'll see in just a couple years is phenomenal. And your kid is still your kid, but they don't have to have that frustrating, that exhausting. Again, no kid wants to feel like that. The kid that's punching holes in the walls and spitting at you, who would want to feel that way?
Right. Exactly.
Just don't know how to get it out. And so those treatments will help them figure that out.
How did you, whenever you said you would punish, when he would do something wrong, and I think that's what most parents do, how did you learn, and what did you learn on how to parent or punish him, instead of him escalating up? What was your tactic?
That's a great question. So what I realized early on is nothing I was doing was working.
Right, right.
So our typical parenting model is that our child misbehaves, we punish them, they no longer do that behavior.
Right.
But what happens in these kids with autism is if they don't have the skill set, they can't adjust their behavior.
Okay.
So we have to first teach them what we expect, then we reward it when they do it. Then when they can consistently do it, then if they choose to not do it, we can punish, right?
Okay.
So if you punished me for not being able to run 5 miles, I'm still not going to be able to run 5 miles tomorrow. I'm not a runner, by the way.
Right.
So first
we're not either. So you're in good company.
So first you have to teach me to be able to run 5 miles before you can do any kind of punishments. And that's what I realized was the step I was missing. So for me to punish for spitting and kicking, even though that seems obvious, well, he didn't know how to express himself to me. So first I had to teach him how to express himself to me. Then I rewarded, which by the way, rewards doesn't mean you have to give them something tangible. The greatest reward is praise. Just saying, good job. I noticed you worked hard on that. That was awesome. That's reward for a kid. They want your praise. Whatever gets rewarded gets repeated. And so start looking at little baby steps. Even if you teach me to run a mile, that doesn't mean the next day I'm running 5, right? So start teaching little things of what you expect and then rewarding those, and you'll see kind of the script get flipped. Because if you were like me and nothing you were doing to punish was working, try going the other way and you'll see a lot of success.
Well, I just want to dial into that real quick. So let's just go through the spitting exercise. So, okay. First we know what you did and then that didn't work. And that's what we would all do. Yep. So then you say, how did you educate him not to spit?
So first I had to educate him on what to do instead.
Okay.
So we started talking about emotions. So, and then if he would spit, honestly, I ignored it to begin with. And I know that sounds crazy, but if I can't reward it and I'm trying not to punish anything, then my only other choice is to ignore.
Okay. So
I literally would just ignore it in the beginning. So if he spit, kicked, did something that wasn't what I was looking for, I just didn't do anything. And that is a response, by the way, I promise.
Yeah. And
so then what would happen is I would say back to him, and you can do it based on how you think you might feel in that situation. So it's a emotional de-escalation technique. So if you look at it, it works great, by the way, for like customer service. Like if you're in customer service and somebody's yelling at you, you can do the same thing. Okay. Just throwing that out there for moms in customer service.
I love that.
So if he's really struggling before we get to the point of spitting, I try to do things like, wow, it sounds like you're really overwhelmed. Wow, that would be frustrating. Wow, it sounds right. Whatever it might be. Now he may completely ignore me and still spit. I ignore it. right? But also remember that I'm doing this at the same time that I'm getting him occupational therapy and speech therapy. And now we have ABA therapy, and we had play therapy at the time as well. Like I said, I got it all.
Yes.
Whoever will help me, help me. And so while he's learning these skills over here, I am then also repeating it and kind of promoting. And so especially when I would see that he would calm down. So, wow, that sounds really frustrating. He's a kid that likes hugs if he's frustrated, which, by the way, with autism, I would never go to him first. I just put my arms out. And that way it's his choice. Does he want to hug or you want to walk away? And so that's a great one for him. Most of the time he'll pick a hug. Sometimes he stomps away. That's okay. Also pick your battles. So if he, instead of spitting, but it still kind of shouts or whatever, and then walks off and goes to his room, I let him have his room. He didn't spit. He didn't kick. He didn't scream names at me. That's an easy one. So his room, he's allowed to stomp off and go to his room as long as he wants. And because again, I'm still not getting the spitting and kicking. And this is a really good functional thing that he can use as an adult. When he gets overwhelmed, he can leave. And so let our kids do that. If your kiddos are overstimulated, they're feeling frustrated, they're feeling angry, let them go to their own space. Don't follow them. Wait until they're ready to come out and have this conversation. Part of it also is when their emotions are engaged, your logic is not engaged. So God created our brain really cool, where it's kind of like, if we look at it from the bottom up, the bottom part is all your survival functions. This is your heartbeat, your lungs breathing. That's why it's so bad if you break your neck. Then you go a level up and it's all of your basic survival. This is your fight or flight, your emotions, your quick response, no logic needed. You see a bear running at you, you run the other way, right? Like you don't sit and stop and ponder having tea with the bear. Well, then you go another level up, and this is all your high level thinking. This is your conscious thinking. Well, if my kid is sitting in level 2 with all the emotions, because now we're overstimulated, we're frustrated, we're angry, I can't expect that anything I say to him out of logic is going to work because he's in level 2, not level 3, right?
It's a great way to think about that. That's really cool.
And so that's why calming down, by the way, saying words when they're in level 2, when they're frustrated, when they're angry, letting them talk out their emotions will help them actually engage level 3. And now we can shift to logic. If you just say, calm down, that does nothing. But if you let them actually talk out, I'm feeling really frustrated. Okay, then what happened? Then this happened. Then this happened. As far as they want to go, now they're shifted out of that fight or flight. They're no longer emotional. Now you can talk to them about logic and planning in the future and those kind of things.
So good. Thank you for taking the time just to walk the moms through that. Because I know they're thinking, okay, how did she do it? How did she do it?
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sort of going into that detail.
Absolutely. It is not an overnight thing either.
Sure.
So there's a little bit of progress, a little bit of backwards, a little bit of progress, a little bit of backwards. And so as long as you keep that momentum and you stick to a plan and you're working with good therapists, you will, it's almost like overnight you level up. Like, oh my gosh, we can do this without even throwing a fit $1. Oh my gosh, we haven't had a hole in our wall this week. Like celebrate all those little milestones.
Oh my Lord,
great.
yes.
That's amazing. You've talked about different ways to support your child with autism and different ways to like get on their level and like how opening your arms and letting them come to you, but that's supporting them. But how do the families get support? Like, do you have any good resources for that?
That's a fantastic question. So families need lots of support. First, I would check with your church and see if they have any small groups, care teams, anything, just to be able to support you all. Depending on the size of your church, there's going to be different things available, but I would check there first. Mamas, you cannot pour into your kids unless you are refueled.
Amen.
There's nothing left. You cannot be burnt out and still helping. And for kiddos with special needs, you need more fuel. And so whatever that looks like to you, it doesn't mean you have to go and spend a lot of money. It could even be taking a walk in the morning, take a hot bath by yourself at night, anything just to kind of allow yourself to decompress. So, by the way, watching television doesn't count. So in terms of your brain, that's not actually resting and getting support that you need. So I would definitely say taking those breaks. If you need a mentor for you and your spouse to be able to encourage you, maybe another couple that can pour back into you and make sure that you are getting what you need.
So if a mom wants to improve her communication with her autistic child, what would be your suggestions? So
there is a book actually called The Explosive Child that I read and is absolutely phenomenal in terms of helping to understand how to communicate better if your child tends to be more emotionally explosive, and how to understand what's going on and how to respond. There's another book called Uniquely Human. And I think I like that book simply because it was written by a linguistic professor instead of a psychologist. And so all he did was work with kids with autism or other special needs. And so he literally goes in and explains how kids are communicating and why they're communicating the way they are. So for instance, children with autism, when they get excited, they tend to flap their hands. Well, he explains it in terms of, if you won the lottery and won $600 million, you probably would jump up and down and flap your hands too.
Sure.
But children with autism just get excited over different things than we might. And so it's a great way to those two books really put into perspective and helped me in a lot of ways to communicate with my child. Secondly, so some of the things that I've taken from that are, one, let him come to me. So even if he's upset and I choose to go in his room because it's been a little while, I go sit down on the other side of the room and I wait until he's ready. The second is, try to put yourself in whatever is going on. So is this kid having a meltdown and you look around and go, okay, well, we have 50 people over for a football party. Maybe that's why he's overstimulated. Try to have some empathy. Take yourself and put yourself in their shoes, and then try to respond in a way that you might need. So if there's 50 people at my house and my kid's hiding in the room, I'm not going to make him come out. And so because of that, he trusts me. He knows that I'm not going to pull him into situations that make him really uncomfortable. So the more that you can build that trust and see. So if it's dinner time and he's freaking out, and I'll ask a question, what is it about this food that you don't like? It looks dirty. That was one recently. Well, it was because there was spices on the noodles. Okay. You want me to rinse them off? Yeah. And so when you start asking the right questions, it'll really help too. So try to take a pause and think, okay, this behavior is not because he just wants to be naughty. This behavior is because something else is going on in his brain, and try to start asking those questions. The more that you ask those questions, the more that you're creating a safe space for him to tell you the answers to it. They just might not always think to tell you. So I remember one time we were driving to school and it was time to get out of the car. And I'm like, okay, buddy, hop down, and I'm trying to rush off. And he was like, no. Just no, we're just not going to get out of the car. No. And I was like, okay. But by then I had learned to ask questions, because before I would have been like, get out of the car. Right. And like, you're going to be in trouble. If you don't get out of the car, we're going to be late for school. And this whole things that we do as moms.
Sure.
But instead I learned to ask questions, and I said, okay, why don't you want to get out of the car? And he said, well, because when I get down, my socks will scrunch in my shoes and I don't like that. Well, now that I know why, I can work out a solution with him. And so I think stopping to ask what's going on instead of just assuming defiance also has really helped.
That's good. And another underlying issue, or not issue, but thing that moms need to take into consideration is not to take things personal. Because you've said a few things and I'm like, oh, that would hurt my feelings, or wow, that would make me, but what you said, you sort of had to learn. Don't take this personal, right? It's not about me. It's about him, and understanding the way his brain is firing all the time.
Yes. So that first year was really hard.
I bet.
I am a words of affirmation person. Sure. Words hurt my feelings. And so to be screamed, I hate you every day by a tiny version of yourself is really hard. And what I will say is he no longer does that, or it's at least not to me. Once in a while, it does still slip out to his brother. But now that he's learned to take a deep breath and control his, as soon as we look at him, he'll either say, I'm sorry.
Right.
Or he'll take, he'll kind of, but he did this, but then he'll say sorry. He's still calming down. It's not escalating like it was. So it still slips out now and then. Definitely doesn't hurt as much. I mean, 3 years of hearing it kind of does make you a little less sensitive to it. But you can't take things personal. And I know it's so hard because you'll do things, work so hard, and then you get, and I hate you. Or we were out in public one time and we were by the base of these stairs of this like kind of lookout tower you could climb. And we climbed it once and climbed down, and he was maybe 4 at the time. And he wanted to climb it again, but we had to move forward. And so he's over there by the stairs yelling, I hate the stupid family. This whole family sucks. And people are walking by this, little 4-year-old who sounds like a teenager, kind of laughing, because it was like, and so I had to just kind of keep moving, and I can't get embarrassed by what other people think. And there's times when he's misbehaving in public and I'm just ignoring it because I know that if I go there emotionally, it's just going to make it worse. And I'm sure people look at me and think, what a terrible mom. She's not even addressing this bad behavior by her kid. But I have to care more about doing what's helping him than I care about what even other people are thinking of me.
Ooh, that's so good.
That's good. It's so hard.
That's
but
so good.
So hard.
It's good though.
I have a question. So
Okay.
you said that, like, let's just use the sock instance for what my question is. Did it take him a while to get to the point where he could identify what was upsetting him? And how did you get him to the point where he could communicate
Express
that to you?
That's a great question. And that in itself took a really long time. Socks and shoes in our house are still the hardest thing we deal with. So first of all, we're not completely over it, right? So these last pair of shoes that we just bought about 6 weeks, 2 months ago, or somewhere in there, it took us 18 stores over 3 weekends to find a pair of shoes that he would wear. So he loves shoes, or at least he loves the idea of shoes, but then actually putting shoes on that he will wear is two totally different things. The other thing that can happen is with socks, you'll find a pair of socks that'll wear up until his feet grow. Well, now they don't fit exactly the same. And now maybe he might not even like that kind of brand, and we have to find a whole new brand. First of all, the communicating part has helped me because I started listening better. So not expecting that the first or second or even, 25th pair of shoes he tries on will work has helped me. Knowing that we're going to have to try on a bazillion pair of socks has helped me. But then when he's getting dressed in the morning, he has learned how to say help. So that was one of our biggest things is he wouldn't even think to ask for help. Most kids do. And that's where kids with autism have to be taught these certain things that don't naturally occur like they do for other kids. So he will either ask for help, which I've nominated Daddy for that one. That gets to be Daddy's job of helping him get socks and shoes on in the morning. And we worked out the system where if Daddy pulls the sock on really hard while he puts his shoe on, then it seems to work out. This is going to be different for every family, but he knows that now he can go to Daddy and Daddy will help him fix that sock. It's been that routine, that practice. Do we have a perfect record of him still not throwing shoes in the morning? No. But where we have gained traction is that he'll throw a shoe toward a wall instead of a person. And so we still celebrate those milestones. But he will ask for help once he gets frustrated enough. It's almost like he has to come back out of that emotional state and then go back into logic. And because he's been taught now that he can ask for help with putting his socks and shoes on. And by the way, you have to reward that. So if you're teaching your kid to ask for help, when they do ask for help, you have to kind of drop everything and help. Then they learn that pattern.
Okay.
But it's taken a couple years.
This has just been like a gold mine. So I'm so beyond grateful for you and for you sharing all of this with our moms out there. So, but before we go, because we're running out of time, you've mentioned 2 great books, and we'll put that in the show notes. But do you have any other resources for autistic children that would help the moms?
Well, I actually do have a question for you. Make sure this is okay. So after I spoke with you that wonderful day, the Lord had put it in my heart to create a space for resources for women and dads, I suppose, but with children with autism. So I've now just launched it actually this week, called thesensorycloset.com. And it's going to be blogs and videos of me talking about autism and how you can do certain things.
Yes, we can share that 100%. Yes.
And so it also will have things that I've bought personally for my son or just really recommend in terms of like leggings that you can put under their shorts so that the shorts don't bother them, or socks that we use, or so all of the resources that I have found and just spent hundreds of hours kind of shopping for will all be in one place too. So thesensorycloset.com.
Okay. That is amazing. I bet moms out there are crying right now.
I'm like getting emotional just thinking about the impact that this is going to
help
touch all these moms. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Okay, last question.
My pleasure.
We always love to leave the moms feeling encouraged, and I'm sure this is an overwhelming world, which you have definitely dove into and just enlightened all of us. So what one thing would you just share with the mamas out there that they are dealing with this? This isn't a neighbor, this isn't a family member, but it's their life every single day. How would you just encourage them before we go?
First of all, I just want to say I see you. And that the Lord sees you, and that your child has a purpose and a plan, that you are not a failure, and that you can do this. I remember at one point I was in tears, kind of praying and just crying in my room because something had happened. And the Lord led me to a verse that I'm probably going to slaughter because I'm not a biblical scholar, and this wasn't in any of my notes for today. But it was the part where Abraham's mistress. What was her name?
It's not
Yep,
Hannah.
her.
Oh gosh, it's not Hadasha. What is her name?
I don't remember.
Starts with an H. Okay.
Okay. Yep,
Whatever.
Her.
Yes.
See, I should have Googled it or something first, but it's where she went off into the wilderness with her son, and her son was crying or crying out. He was, a donkey of a man. And so, but the Lord, I'm hoping that doesn't mean that my son is a donkey of a man, but the Lord led me to this verse. It's specifically the part where it said he was crying out and the Lord heard his cries. And all I want to say to you today is that your son or daughter's behavior is not because they're bad. It's not because they don't have a purpose and a plan. It's because they're simply crying out and the Lord hears them.
Oh my goodness.
So amazing.
That's so good. Is it Hagar? Is that who it is? Okay, we're going to find it and we'll put it in the show notes. I'm like I'm looking around. Where's
we all
the
these
Bible?
books, but we don't have a Bible.
I know. I have
Bible.
one in my office, but I'm not going to take the time to run down the hall. But we'll look it up and we'll put it in there. But anyways, wow. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This was amazing.
Wonderful.
Yes. And I'm so glad that God brought us together several months ago in Florida. And you know what? This is God's perfect timing that it'd be aired right now. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I completely agree, because when I was shopping, the Lord put it on my heart, and then I kind of realized how the calendars were going together. I just had to laugh.
Yes.
I tend to be very planning and purposeful and organized in all that I do. And I think the Lord keeps showing off on what he can do when I just get out of the way.
Yeah. He's like, if you'll move, I'll take care of all of it. He tells me that on a regular basis too.
So good. It's so true.
Well, thank you again.
Kristen. Thank you so much. And moms, thank you so much for joining us today on this very special episode of Wire Talk. And just so you don't miss any episode, make sure that you have subscribed to Wire Talk and never miss an episode, because they're amazing like this. If you have any questions for us, please send them to info@birdsonawiremoms.com, and we can't wait to hear from you. See you guys next week.